Yeah, we never solved our problems, so the cycle just goes on. Paid to save power in torture, from Iraq to Vietnam. Sending shots at kids and doctors. When we talk they hear our calls. Call that freedom, I call bullshit. See these devils they call gods. It's screaming in the night. See the things they try to hide. All they buried in the dark. 10,000 candles kinda light. Till they do not bomb the Middle East. Till Snowden's home. Assange released. I know something you should know when that whistle blows. And I'm not sorry if you can't take it. The children starving, they might not make it. Missiles falling, striking fear, but the whistle's calling, can you hear? It's screaming in the night. See the things they try to hide. All they buried in the dark. 10,000 candles kinda light. Till they do not bomb the Middle East. Till Snowden's home. Assange released. I know something you should know. I hear it screaming in the night. See the things they try to hide. All they buried in the dark. 10,000 candles kinda light. Till they do not bomb the Middle East. Till Snowden's home. Assange released. I know something you should know when that whistle blows.
I didn't really plan a speech today. Again, it's like there's no time. But we all know it's been 3 years since Julian Assange has been in the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom, Belmarsh prison. And in those 3 years, we have seen the surveillance powers of this corporatist existence of an empire expand. We've seen the powers of corporations and the national security state apparatus take control and take away rights, liberties, and freedoms from the American people that we will never get back. We can look back to 9/11 and look back to what was taken away from us. Did we get any of that back once supposed threats were subsided? We will never get any of it back. And that's the thing they don't tell you, is once you lose these civil liberties and these civil rights, you never get them back. And so we can look back to what's happened the last 3 years since 2019, since April 11th of 2019. 3 years ago, we had an election where many people questioned the election, where many supporters of Bernie Sanders thought, what the hell happened? The guy who was in 5th place became the president of the United States, and the woman who couldn't win a single delegate, Kamala Harris, became the vice president with one phone call from Barack Obama. Subsequently, of course, we had January 6th, where the mainstream media took that incident and called it an insurrection and an attempted coup. Rich of the United States to talk about coups when they go all over the world, overturning legitimate democracies and completely ignoring the choices of those people of these democracies. In 2014, Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt started giving out cookies and went to Ukraine, trying to subvert a democracy. They wanted Yanukovych out, and they wanted to put in their puppet, and they did, and they were able to do that. But nobody talks about those 8 years ago when all of this happened. They say this is only Putin's war, that NATO and the United States had nothing to do with it, which is entirely false, because there is a phone call, an audio that all of you can listen to, where Victoria Nuland purports as to how she wants Yanukovych removed. And 14,000 people died, 14,000 ethnic Russians and Slavics, and people of the Romani origin. Nobody talks about those dead children, those bodies that the US media ignored up until, of course, this very conflict that we find ourselves in. And make no mistake, of course, there are innocent people on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side, but let's not pretend that the United States isn't an empire with over 1,000 military bases all over the world, and you can compare that to China or to Russia or to any existing empire, because you can't. So when people compare those two, they are lacking an understanding as to what it is that we're living in today. This is Western imperialism. This is Western hegemony. And right now, what we're seeing is a shift into a multipolar world, a pushback from the East and the global South. I was in Nicaragua recently, and I got to experience what fair and free elections are. elections where they publicly count the ballots, where people love their government and they are so excited to support their leader. Yet, we call Daniel Ortega a dictator, just like we call the people in Cuba, the government in Cuba, dictators. We say that about Iran. We say that about any country that we consider an enemy. Yet, look at the people we have in power. Look at what happened in 2020 in the pandemic world, where these countries responded so much better than this first world nation. When they were able to be more honest and open, where they were able to have debates. In the United States, we vilified each other. We divided each other. That's what these people did. These 1% global capitalist elites are trying to pit us against each other. And the reality is we need actual media like Julian to expose that. And we have very few of us left. Because what happens is we get censored, we get sneered, we get vilified to no end. We get told we're Putin puppets. We get told that we're paid by the Assad regime. We get completely ostracized. And we need to push back against that. I am here today because of Julian Assange, because he released Wikileaks and he inspired me and many others to take it upon themselves to be the truth tellers, to be the ones who scream off the tops of their lives that this is the Department of Injustice, not the Department of Justice. There is no justice here today in this moment. We don't live in a democracy. We don't even live in a republic. We live in an oligarchy. The United States is a military, corporatist state with a film production crew ready and willing to create propaganda for narrative managers and puppets to continue promoting what must be said. And that is the reality we live in. And the more people understand it, the better it'll be for the rest of us. And so I tell all of you who are out here today, you are brave just for showing up, because we will get mobbed, and you probably do. Oh, look at you bringing up Julian Assange. He's just a guy. He's a traitor, just like somebody just walked by and said. He's not important. They don't even know he's not even an American. He's an Australian publisher. And he's the reason why I learned about the collateral murder videos. He is the reason why there was so much pushback in the progressive movement in 2016 when Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party worked together to subvert Bernie Sanders' run for president. And that is why I'm an election integrity activist. That is why I care about foreign policy. That is why I'm an anti-imperialist. It is because of inspirations like Julian, and he deserves to be here with his family. He deserves to be free, because journalism isn't a crime. War crimes are a crime. And the truth is the beginning to fighting war. Thank you very much.
Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange!
I'm Randy Credico.
And Randy, you had a comedy last night to raise funds for Julian Assange and trying to do the best you can to get out the word. It seems like there's an information blockade about what's going on with Julian Assange.
Well, there's always been a blockade prohibition in mainstream media. I mean, you can only do things on stations like KPFA and other Pacifica stations. I've been doing a show there for 5 years on WBAI called Assange Countdown to Freedom, which for 2 years was really at KPFA flashpoints. So it's difficult to get that kind of information out there. And you're certainly not going to see it even in the Chronicle, LA Times, once in a while, but they're not interested in it. They're not interested in it. A lot of them have bought the, the perception that, the perception that has been presented by those who've had this organized smear job against them, orchestrated right from the top, the DOJ, CIA, NSA, to paint Julian Assange as some kind of criminal. It's an outrage that this continues, and what it says is that the people who are not reporting on it, not digging into it, in mainstream media. What it means is they're not journalists. They're not. If they were journalists and and were true to their professional standards, they would definitely dig into it, investigate it, and if they did, would they report on it? I don't know. You got to see where they get their money. They get their money from, Raytheon.
It's a business.
It's a they're working. I mean, Operation Mockingbird never went away. Understand that. These guys are advocates for the power structure. That's all they are. The people on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. And
they're very worried about war criminals now, aren't they?
Yeah, except for the ones that they cover up for.
Biden, Obama.
I mean, just a month before this conflict that continues for now 8 years in Ukraine. It's been going on for 8 years. U.S. and NATO have been part of it, but just in February, or was it March, Biden dropped a drone on somebody in a country, a sovereign country called Syria, and killed 7 children. That is a war crime. Did it unannounced, just went in there in a country, invaded a country, and dropped a drone. And at least 7 children and many more civilians. We don't hear about all of them.
This is their definition of war crimes. In other words, if somebody else does it, it's a war crime. But if the United States does it, it's not a war crime.
The United States has been committing war crimes domestically, whether it be against Native Americans and against African Americans, and that includes 100 years ago in Tulsa. But the Philippines, you take a look at the turkey shoot in the Philippines in the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century. All the way through, from that point on, there was never a stop. Nicaragua, 5 years later, 7 years later, just around the globe, we've been committing war crimes. We're doing it right now. We're facilitating them in Yemen, and whatever we're doing in Palestine. Is it even a war? I mean, it's just a crime. It's crimes against humanity. I don't want to have to make it classified as a war crime. It's just a crime against humanity, and that's what the U.S. has done. Because to have a war, you have to have both sides engaging. They're not even engaging. Syrians aren't fighting against the U.S. Venezuelans aren't fighting against the U.S. Cubans aren't fighting against the U.S. But sanctions are a crime.
I mean, didn't Madeleine Albright say it was okay to kill
500,000 people?
Was that a war crime? I mean,
she's sharing that information right now with Nixon and Hitler, down south underneath this earth. So yeah, she was a war criminal. She was a sick, diabolical human being, and right up there with Kissinger. She and Kissinger hold the record for the most deaths committed by a Secretary of State.
And you think that we're driving towards a world war? Because it seems like the United States now and the Western countries.
War. No, but the prophets, they're so addicted to the prophets. They're so addicted, they don't know what the consequences are going to be. They don't care. They want to sell weapons, give weapons. Ukraine uses this as a proxy conflict between and wear down Russia is what it really amounts to. It's almost like Russia got set into a trap. They're the ones who set the whole thing up. NATO did. NATO, which was a defensive organization, now is an offensive organization. Italy just expanded their contribution 2% for the first time in 10 years. So they've reorganized themselves and rebranded themselves.
Powers and Newland, they were involved in overthrowing the government in Ukraine?
Yeah, in 2014. That was a what do you call it? A coup staged by the U.S. That's all, overturning an election. And it's all about, these guys don't care. It could lead to a nuclear war because Russia's not going to keep taking this. You can't keep expanding. Let's say they went into, they didn't let anything get into Cuba, did they? We were going to go to war with Russia for getting missiles to Cuba 60 years ago. They're not anywhere near us. We got weapons all around them in China.
If there were missiles in Mexico or Canada.
Yeah. If there were missiles in those two countries. I mean, but look, only one exchange of nuclear weapons enough to finish off the earth. That's it. Just what it'd be over. So you can't play. You got, and the U.S. is no longer the main power anymore. It's no longer, we're no longer dominating the world. You know, and things are happening in Russia with China and India. They're going to come up with a new currency. The U.S. is a dying country, a dying empire, like the Roman Empire.
Don't they get more adventurous as they die?
Yeah, I think so. It's last kicks, as they call it, right?
They get crazier.
Right, yeah. Last, and you know, they're flailing around those feet and arms. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel Cedar. I'm here because I support Julian Assange. I think he's a hero, and I don't feel the need to qualify that statement. I think it's really gross the amount of journalists that have been silent on this issue, won't even stick up for one of their own, and the few times that they do mention Julian Assange, they feel the need to qualify that with, oh, you don't need to like him, or you don't have to agree with him, like basically implying that he did something wrong. He didn't do anything wrong at all. He's a hero, and by doing that, by qualifying and making it sound like there's something he did wrong or there's something wrong with him, you're doing the CIA's work for them. You're doing half of it for them, implying that there's something wrong with him.
The Washington Post, New York Times, they used the WikiLeaks material.
Right.
They could be charged as well.
Exactly. That's what's so gross, that they won't even stick up for themselves, basically, because whether you realize it now or later, this is going to affect all of us, especially journalists. And but yeah, I'm just so glad to see so many people out here. April 11th, 2019 was a terrible day. That's when I decided that I needed to get in the streets and do something. When they kidnapped him from the Ecuadorian embassy, it was very upsetting, and yeah, felt helpless. But we're not helpless. That's why we're here. I'm thankful for you all being here and everyone being here, because this is what it's going to take.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Misty Winston. I'm with Action for Assange.
Why don't you talk about the action that you're taking today and why you're doing it?
So the reason why we're doing it is because today is the 3-year anniversary of the arrest and imprisonment of Julian Assange. So he has been held in Belmarsh prison, which is the UK's Guantanamo Bay, for 3 years now. His health has been deteriorating for years. He had a mini stroke on October 27th during the hearings. So you know, he's a journalist. He shouldn't be in prison. He didn't do anything wrong. And so this is really the most dangerous threat on the First Amendment and press freedom that we've ever seen. So it's really important that we're out here trying to raise awareness and support for Assange so that we can prevent his extradition to the United States.
And it seems like he's off the news. There's very little news. Are you surprised by that?
Not at all. It's been the case forever. There's never, mainstream media does not cover Julian Assange ever. And it's very difficult to get any coverage that's fair. Anytime that they do speak about him, it's generally misinformation. So I'm not surprised by that at all. That's going to continue to be the case. That's why we depend very much on independent media and then just supporters to help try to get the word out.
There's a lot of talk about war crimes and war criminals. What about Biden and the war crimes the United States conducted in Iraq and Libya, all over the world?
That's a great question. That's a great question. You know, Hillary Clinton came out to wag her finger at Vladimir Putin, and Joe Biden is wagging his finger at Vladimir Putin. They're calling for an investigation of Vladimir Putin's war crimes. And I'm no Putin fan, but we certainly don't have the moral authority to be pointing fingers at anybody else when we are by far the worst perpetrator of war crimes on planet Earth. It's not even close.
The war crimes that he was able to expose through WikiLeaks, have any of those people been prosecuted?
Not a one. In fact, the only people who have been punished for those is the whistleblower Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, the publisher of those war crimes. So that's always the case. We always punish our truth tellers. It was the case with Daniel Ellsberg, with John Kiriakou, with Chelsea Manning. We tend to penalize our truth tellers, and the war criminals walk free.
What does it say about the state of journalism if a journalist who's not even American can be charged with, the charges that are being made against him?
This is by far the biggest threat to press freedom, for sure, because he is an Australian citizen. He's not an American. He's never been an American. WikiLeaks has never been an American company or publication. So, this is a real threat to the future of press freedom. He being charged under our Espionage Act, but being afforded none of the protections of our First Amendment, is very much the United States wanting to have its cake and eat it too. And essentially, this will give the United States global jurisdiction jurisdiction over information and journalism.
And the idea of espionage for a non-American, does that mean anybody in the world could be charged with espionage?
That's exactly what that means. That means the United States, anybody, anywhere who publishes anything that they find to be damaging to their credibility, or that they don't like, or that embarrasses them in any way, will be under threat. And that's not just journalists. That can really include anybody. So this is a really, this is a really serious. We can't afford to lose this fight.
Okay, thank you. What can they do?
So there are lots of things people can do. You can get involved. We do actions all the time here in DC and around the globe, really. So you can follow Candles for Assange is a great Twitter account, at Candles4Assange. My friend Alex does a great job of kind of getting all of the events together and publishing them all on social media so that we can be coordinated. You can, write to your Congress people. I know that's, probably not going to do much, but it is, if they know people are watching, it does do.
There was a resolution in Congress to release him at one time.
Tulsi Gabbard introduced one, yes. She's the only politician elected to office who's ever really made any effort whatsoever to save his life. So we're grateful to her for that. That will probably never be reintroduced. Essentially, we're not going to get this through legislation or through legal recourse. It's going to take mass public pressure. We're going to have to get people into the streets and make it politically untenable for them.
These quote-unquote liberal Congress people, AOC, Barbara Lee, you have many, many quote-unquote radicals. Why aren't they speaking up for Assange?
They're not radical. These are not radicals. They are liberals, and they. I think that they've made it very clear. AOC is a big supporter of censorship, so I don't think it's really surprising that these are people who are not standing up for what's right and for Julian Assange. And frankly, they're part of the establishment. That's what he's exposed, is the crimes of the establishment. So it's not really surprising to me that none of them are speaking out.
My name's Sal. We're just trying to raise awareness to free Julian Assange. He's a political prisoner.
And why the Justice Department?
Well, because they're the ones that are pursuing the case. So, just trying to free Julian Assange.
And they're accusing him
with the Espionage Act and put him in jail for 175 years for the crime of journalism.
And he's not even a citizen of the United States.
Not even a citizen, exactly. Exactly. I'm glad that you're right on there. It makes absolutely no sense. He's an Australian citizen. He's been illegally detained in Britain's Guantanamo Bay Belmarsh prison for the last 3 years, and before that he was basically on lockdown in the Ecuadorian embassy. And really all he did was publish the truth. He didn't do any of the things that he's being accused of. He didn't steal anything. Things were leaked to him legally under the protection of the First Amendment from the U.S. journalists that leaked it to him, and he published it safely, and he retained their anonymity, and basically he's being punished for not squealing. Like, if he would have given up his resources, they would have probably gave him some clemency, but because he refused to, participate, and that's where we're at.
It seems like both the Democrats and Republicans are going along with the...
Oh, absolutely. No, you got two wings of the corporate party are more than happy to have war continue, and that's really probably the biggest thing that he puts he really makes that difficult. Him and Daniel Hale, a handful of others have really, Chelsea Manning, just kind of lifted the fog of war and shown what we've done over the last 20 years and before. We're really just for imperialistic gains. I mean, Daniel Hale showed, he released the data, there's our truck, that's great, released the data that, we had 90% civilian casualties with our drone strikes. What are we really doing over there? And now we're starting with Ukraine, and we could really use Julian Assange out here to help us kind of uncover the truth of what's going on, not just in Ukraine, but around the world with the imperialistic wars.
Biden and the U.S. government say they want to go after people committing war crimes. What about the war crimes of the United States?
Absolutely. You could join us if you want, because you seem to already be on our side, and you're 100% right. The hypocrisy is rich. They were calling pretty much everybody Nazis for the last 4 years, and now they're happy to fund the Azov Battalion, who is known to have actual Nazis in it, and that's really what's happening. But
is that a crime?
Is that a crime?
Yeah. Nazis.
I think it's gross. I think to call yourselves the champions of freedom and use war to it's just gross. But I would.
Maguire. We are here to protest the extradition of Julian Assange and his imprisonment at Belmarsh.
And Julian Assange has faced prosecution for crimes in the United States. He isn't even a citizen, though, is he?
He is not a U.S. citizen. He is an Australian citizen. He's being tried under the Espionage Act, as if the U.S. does have jurisdiction over the entire world, as if it's a crime to expose, well, war crimes. Wikileaks and Assange's efforts, they have never had to issue a single retraction. This so-called criminality is really justice, and the need for punity. The Biden administration seeking to lock him up and extradite him to the U.S. That's the real crime here. The war crimes he exposed, those are the real crimes. And this comes at a particular volatile moment in world history, as we've been witnessing Ukraine and Russia, that whole debacle go down. I noticed many of our media is pointing fingers at war crimes. There's lots of talk of war crimes. What I ask people, the media, everybody, how can we point fingers when we're locking up people for the crime of exposing war crimes? How can we claim to be involved in a battle of democracy versus autocracy? Ukraine a democracy and Russia autocracy. How can we really argue that in good faith when it's a crime to inform the citizenry of the government's actions? If you can't have an informed population, you can't have a functional democracy. Democracy breaks down with ignorance.
The crimes that he exposed in Iraq, have they been prosecuted?
No, there's been no accountability. And it was Afghanistan too, in terms of one of the things the Afghanistan leaks showed was the Pentagon was covering up large numbers of civilian casualties. They were tampering the civilian death count, but there was no accountability for any of that. No one was. No one.
It depends who you are if you're held accountable.
Yes, yeah. If you're if you're lying or killing for the government, well, we haven't seen any accountability for that. If you're exposing it, you will face retribution. It's certainly not justice.
And HMP Belmarsh, why don't you talk about that while you're wearing this jumpsuit?
Wait, repeat that question?
HMP Belmarsh. What is Belmarsh?
Oh,
HMP?
Belmarsh is the prison that Assange is being held in. It's essentially the UK's version of Guantanamo. It's where it's a max security prison that is used for high profile cases, maximum security. Julian Assange has been in solitary confinement for his entire stay there, basically. The UN Special Council on Torture basically said that it amounts to torture, what they're doing to him right now with the isolation and the treatment of him in the prison. He's not receiving the medical care he needs. He's not receiving the psychological care he needs. He's not receiving any sort of care. This is to break him down and make an example of people who would dare challenge the foreign policy establishment here.
Is this a threat to journalists and journalism?
Yes, because he is getting prosecuted for the crime of reporting facts. Like I said, Wikileaks has never had to issue a retraction. They have never printed something that is false. Everything is verifiably true that they have published. So to consider this not a war on journalism is nothing short of just negligence to acknowledge reality. This is setting a precedent that even if you're not a U.S. citizen, if you publish something that exposes the U.S.'s government crimes that it wants to keep secret, it wants to keep confidential to save itself the embarrassment, then you can have the entire apparatus of the U.S. intelligence and foreign policy and defense agencies breathing down your neck until you're rotting in a cage for the rest of your life. We were protesting at the British Embassy to demand that Britain doesn't follow through and approve the extradition. One of the things that a speaker there had mentioned was that without Wikileaks, among various other now knowledge, now facts of reality that we know about. But one of the things that WikiLeaks brought to light was the North Atlantic,
trade agreement.
North Atlantic,
NATO.
yeah, thank you. With, you know, these free trade agreements and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, without being aware that that was on the horizon and in the works behind closed doors, the effort to push back against it could not have been surmounted in the way that it was, and it was successful. Without WikiLeaks, we don't know if it would have been successful, and that was of crucial importance to working Americans, as that would have resulted in even more jobs being shipped overseas and more outsourcing to cheaper, more exploitative countries where companies can utilize that cheap labor force and American families can starve.
Well, that's why the corporations, government don't want this information out. It might hurt their plans.
It might hurt, and their wallets.
And we have a Julian Assange Action Committee there, and have had many protests at the British consulate. Also, I'm a member of the union, the Pacific Media Workers Guild, CWA. And we were able to get our local to call for the freedom of Julian Assange. And I think the unions in this country, the journalist unions, have a responsibility to stand up and be brave for themselves and all other journalists around the world. Imagine a journalist who's not even from the United States being charged with an espionage. It's an outrage. It's an outrage. It means that any journalist around the world can be arrested and brought to the United States if they say something truthful about the United States, about the crimes of the United States. So we have to organize in the labor movement and the working class. Unfortunately, my union, even though it passed a resolution, won't even put it on the website. And we brought it to the CWA National Convention, the CWA, and they refused to take it up. They refused to take it up. So this is a union, the newspaper guild, the news guild, that represents journalists in this country, and they're silent about Julian Assange. That is an outrage. Every journalist has to stand up and say, free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange now. And we have to make that an issue for the entire working class, for all trade unions, because WikiLeaks exposed the crimes of capitalism and imperialism. They expose what the United States is doing all over the world. That's why they want to shut him down and make him an example. So I say solidarity. We're going to have to continue to organize and build support for Julian Assange. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
I'm here with the People's Party. We're here to support the release of Julian Assange as opposed to his perpetual torture. You know, we live in the worst oligarchy, the biggest terrorist country in the world, and we at the People's Party, we're coming out here to support and demand not just the release of Julian Assange, but all whistleblowers that have been persecuted and tortured since Barack Obama. Right, a high priority on Obama's presidency was torturing whistleblowers, was locking up, incarcerating and torturing whistleblowers. So we're here because people don't understand until it's too late, right? They wait for the thing to happen and for the damage to be done, and then they start crying, and already it's already too late. If you know the persecution of his freedom of speech, it affects all of us, right? If they're persecuting him, what makes you think they won't persecute you, right? What makes you think they won't? And the hypocrisy of the lamestream legacy media, which has taken WikiLeaks coverage and WikiLeaks documents and published it and built careers for all these people, and they turn around and it's like, oh, well, you know, it doesn't matter. But yeah, this man has tremendous integrity, as well as the people that's supporting him.
I'm Marty Goodman, would stand with Assange in New York, and I'm a retired transit worker.
And what do transit workers and unions have to do with Julian Assange?
Well, plenty. Freedom of speech. We went on strike in 2005, and we had a right to do it, yet it's against the law in New York for public workers to strike. In France, striking is in the French Constitution. So any attack on civil liberties anywhere is an attack on all of us.
And is the labor movement supporting Julian Assange?
No.
Why is that?
Well, they're very much linked with the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party establishment, at least, feels like Julian was aiding Russia or some such nonsense, which is completely false. They credit Julian with helping elect Trump, which is ridiculous.
And this whole Russia phobia, what's behind that? Russia's behind this and Russia's behind the election. Do you accept that or do you agree with that?
No, I don't. They had hearings, so what were they called? The FBI had a whole hearing in Congress, and they decided that they could not pin it on Russia. There's been tremendous hysteria about it, like there's been politically in this country for a very long time. It's the communists, the Russians, the immigrants, the blacks, this kind of thing, looking for a scapegoat, and they're looking for one with Russia.
It seems like Trump, although he wanted WikiLeaks released, he, when he was in power, did not do anything to free Julian Assange. What does that say about the Republicans as well as the Democrats?
Well, he found that he was bumping up against the FBI and the CIA and all of those guys, and the Democratic Party in particular, as I mentioned. So that, and the Republicans, the right-wingers. So he found out that there was too much hostility to Assange in the political establishment, and he backed away from that. I mean, he said he was for the working people in this country, and he was supporting the billionaires, trillions in tax cuts, so you couldn't trust anything that Trump said.
And both the Democrats and Republicans are supporting, apparently, the prosecution of Assange. What about the working class having its own political party so it has a choice?
Well, I'm all for having a Labor Party. I don't think there is a real choice at this point. So, hey, I'm all for it. If there's a fighting union or fighting coalition of unions that want to declare themselves independent of the two parties and represent working people, I'm all for it personally. That's my own personal view.
Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever bent? Well, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Must a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? Yes, and how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? Yes, and how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? Well, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Yes, and how many